Before we begin, make sure to like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps stories like this reach more curious minds across the stars. Now, lean in and listen closely. The chamber of the Galactic Council was a cathedral carved from starlight. Arched ceilings shimmered with the glow of 100 dying suns, and banners of alien empires drifted in the artificial breeze, each one a reminder of who held power here. Humanity's flag hung at the very end of the row, half hidden behind the bulk of the Iraq's Dominion's crimson veil. Captain Elias Ward stood beneath it, hands locked behind his back, his pulse steady even as the world he knew tilted toward humiliation. Species 113, Terra, the Chancellor intoned, his voice amplified by the hall's resonant acoustics. He was a tall, insectoid being with translucent skin, and each syllable clicked like bone on glass. After extensive evaluation, the Council finds your species lacking the strength, resilience, and strategic value required for military or territorial contribution. Effective immediately, human expansion privileges are revoked. The words fell like a hammer on the polished obsidian floor. No one gasped. No one protested. They had all expected this outcome. The only sound was the faint hum of the translation drones hovering above the human delegation's heads. Elias didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on the Chancellor, studying the way his mandibles twitched with each word. Around him, the alien representatives shifted in their seats, scales and fur and carapaces gleaming under the Council's white light. They watched humanity the way apex predators regard a wounded animal, with polite interest but no respect. The Vurali ambassador, a serpentine creature with polished obsidian eyes, leaned toward his neighbor. "Too fragile," he hissed, not bothering to lower his voice. "They burn under weak suns, their bones snap like reeds, and they can barely survive outside their gravity well. How do they expect to hold a colony on the rim?" A ripple of soft laughter spread through the gallery, a sound Elias memorized without flinching. His officers, seated behind him, shifted uncomfortably. Commander Rafe's jaw tightened. Lieutenant Vega clenched the edge of her chair hard enough that the polymer creaked. Humiliation was a taste they'd been forced to grow used to since joining the Council network, bitter, metallic, and silent. The Chancellor raised a claw. "Furthermore, no human vessel shall cross the designated expansion boundaries. Violators will be intercepted and," he paused, tilting his head as if savoring the next phrase, "escorted back to their nursery system." Nursery system. Elias almost laughed at that. Earth, reduced to a cradle the galaxy expected never to leave. A part of him wanted to shout. Another part wanted to break the silence with steel and fire. But none of that would help humanity now. What would help them was remembering. Cataloging every insult. Turning it into fuel. When he finally spoke, his voice carried through the hall like a blade through silk. "Understood." The Chancellor blinked, clearly expecting outrage. "You accept these terms?" "I hear them," Elias replied. "Acceptance is something else entirely." A few alien ambassadors tilted their heads, curiosity, mild amusement. One of the Jorvani, crystalline beings of cold blue light, clicked its glass fingers together. "He doesn't know when to submit." Elias glanced their way. "We know exactly when to submit," he said, calm as still water. "We just haven't found a reason worth it yet." For a heartbeat, the vast chamber held its breath. Then the laughter returned, louder this time, a wave washing over the human delegation. They were already dismissed. Already forgotten. As the Council prepared to finalize the motion, Elias's gaze drifted upward toward the tiered shadows of the gallery, the place where observers not directly involved sat to watch judgment from a distance. It was there, beyond the silver glow of the Council's light field, that he saw it. Not a delegate. Not a bureaucrat. Something else. 2 points of molten amber, too steady and too predatory to belong to any species he recognized, glimmered in the darkness. The figure they belonged to was massive, motionless. No movement of breath, no restless shifting. Just a presence. Watching him. Watching the Council. Watching everything. The moment Elias's eyes met those glowing embers, the laughter seemed to fade to a dull murmur behind him. Then just as suddenly the lights flickered. A passing glitch in the Council's energy grid, gone in less than a second. When the glow returned, the figure was gone. Elias turned his attention back to the floor. If anyone else had seen it, they didn't react. Vega leaned forward slightly, whispering just loud enough for him to hear. "Sir. Orders." "Stand down," Elias murmured. "We're not starting a war here. Not today." The Chancellor droned on, sealing humanity's demotion with ceremonial language. It was theater. Every race here had its turn at the podium, and humanity's was a performance no one cared to watch. When the verdict was announced, humanity, restricted expansion, no applause followed. Just silence. The council had moved on. The human delegation filed out of the chamber beneath a parade of banners that seemed to mock them now. Elias walked at the front, his boots striking the polished floor with the crisp rhythm of a soldier who refused to slouch in defeat. The others followed, quiet, eyes down, until the council's doors hissed shut behind them. Outside, the station's promenade stretched wide, glass domes showing the sprawl of the stars, trade ships threading between anchor points, alien soldiers in gleaming armor. 1,000 worlds. Not one of them belonged to Earth. Rafe caught up to him. They made it sound like we should be grateful they didn't strip us of Sol too. They would if they could, Elias replied. Vega's voice was sharp. Sir, this is. I know what it is. Elias stopped walking. His reflection stared back from the glass wall. A man in a dark navy uniform, silver streaks of premature gray near his temples, a face carved by long nights and heavier choices. They're not wrong about the numbers. Not wrong about the technology gap. But they are wrong about us. Vega frowned. How? Because they think strength is what you're born with. He turned toward her, and for the first time since the hearing began, there was a hard, steady fire in his eyes. They've never seen what it looks like when we fight with nothing left to lose. His comlink buzzed, the horizon's edge signaling readiness for departure. Elias took one last look at the council chamber doors behind him. Somewhere beyond those walls, in the shadows, those amber eyes still lingered in his mind. Watching, judging, perhaps waiting. We're leaving, he said. They think they've seen everything humanity can do. They're wrong. As they walked back toward the docking ring, Vega glanced sideways at him. Sir, you're smiling. Elias didn't deny it. The smile was small, tight, but real. Because when they finally realize what a mistake they've made, he said softly, it'll be too damn late. In the void above, 1,000 ships drifted across the starfield, silent, indifferent witnesses to humanity's humiliation. But deep in the darkness, something far less indifferent had been watching. And it was not laughing. The docking clamps released the horizon's edge with a hollow metallic sigh, and the ship drifted into the cold black between the stars. The Galactic station shrank behind them, a glimmering monument to arrogance. Captain Elias Ward stood on the bridge, hands resting lightly against the railing, watching the council's banners fade into the distance. The stars stretched on, indifferent and endless, as if to remind him just how small humanity was supposed to be. Departure vector locked, Lieutenant Vega announced, her voice steady but her jaw tight. Helm engaged. The engines rumbled through the deck, a low vibration that settled into the bones of everyone aboard. Commander Rafe leaned over the navigation display, his scarred fingers dancing across glowing controls. We've cleared the council's perimeter. No one's following us. They don't even think we're worth watching. They're wrong, Elias replied almost absently. His eyes were on the stars, but his mind was replaying the sound of their laughter, a noise that clung to him like smoke. For a long stretch, the bridge was quiet except for the steady hum of the reactor. The crew of the Horizon's Edge wasn't large. 47 officers, most of them too young to remember Earth before it joined the Galactic network, too inexperienced to carry the old pride in their bones. Yet even they could feel it now, the sting of being dismissed, the weight of that verdict pressing against their chests. Captain, Rafe said suddenly, frowning at the incoming transmission logs. We're getting a faint distress signal. Civilian registry. Council convoy. Location. Rim Sector 9 Gamma. That's border territory. They're on their own, Vega muttered, almost bitter. The Council forbade us from operating outside the boundary. If we cross it, we give them a reason to strip what's left. Elias didn't answer immediately. The Rim. Unpatrolled space where predators hunted and the KRLL swarms moved like living storms. He stared at the flickering coordinates. Council ships, begging for help from the species they had just declared too weak to matter. Rafe glanced at him, reading the silence. Orders. Elias turned. His gaze swept over the bridge, young faces, tired faces, waiting faces. Plot a course, he said. Vega blinked. Sir? We're going, Elias replied. If they want to think we're weak, let them. I'm not letting a distress call go unanswered because they said so. A pulse of energy rolled through the horizon's edge as the ship veered off its designated lane. Alarms blinked on the console, quiet warnings that they were entering restricted space. Vega input the course with a grim look. We'll be on site in 28 minutes. The black between stars grew sharper here, colder. The rim didn't glow with the familiar currents of stabilized trade routes. This was wild territory, the kind where sensor echoes whispered before they screamed. A faint static bled into the comms, the kind that made the skin itch. Elias paced the bridge. His crew had followed him before, against orders, against logic. They trusted him because he'd bled for them once on Cestus 5, and because his voice carried the kind of certainty that made impossible things sound survivable. But he wasn't blind. If this went wrong, Earth wouldn't just lose a ship. It would lose a reason to be taken seriously ever again. At 90 minutes out, the first fragments came into view. Hull shards. Twisted plating. Floating debris catching starlight like broken glass. Vega zoomed the forward cams, her fingers tightening on the controls. Council frigates. Iden codes matched the Iraq's delegation's escort. Sir, they're gone. Not gone, Rafe murmured. Eaten. A shape drifted into view. A cruiser torn open like a can, its central spine snapped. The distress beacon still blinked weakly, but the rest was silence. No transmissions. No survivors on scan. Just the wreckage of ships crewed by those who had laughed at humanity's weakness hours ago. Then the lights dimmed. Elias turned sharply to Vega. Report. External interference, she said, her voice thinner now. Gravitic distortion on all decks. It's not natural. Something moved in the dark beyond the debris. Not a ship. Bigger. Heavier. Predatory. The horizon's edge's exterior floodlights struggled to frame it, but each flicker revealed glimpses, chitinous plating, claws like razors, and a serpentine hull that looked grown, not built. No council ship was shaped like that. Rafe whispered the name like a curse. Vorith. The Vorith were not a rumor. They were a warning. A species so old and so lethal the council left them alone at the edge of known space, hoping they would stay there. Apex predators. They didn't negotiate. They hunted. The Vorith ship glided forward, silent as the vacuum itself. No comm hail. No scan signature beyond the dread that wrapped itself around the horizon's edge. Vega's breath hitched. We need to jump out now. Elias didn't move. No. Sir, that thing isn't attacking, he cut in. It wasn't. The Vorith ship moved around the wreckage, massive and deliberate. For a moment, its curved prow aligned directly with the horizon's edge. Every instinct in the human crew screamed to run. But the predator didn't pounce. It circled. Why aren't they firing? Vega whispered. Because they're watching, Elias answered. His voice was quiet, but something had sharpened in it. He'd seen predators before on old colony worlds, the kind that stalked rather than charged. They watched to learn. To weigh. To decide. Incoming energy spike, Rafe barked. The Vorith ship released a blast, not at them. It slammed into a fragment of Iraq's cruiser, vaporizing it in a single flash. Then the creature ship pivoted slightly as if daring the horizon's edge to move. Elias made a decision no sane council officer would have made. Arm forward cannons. Vega stared. Sir, we can't win a fight with that thing. We're not fighting, Elias said. We're answering. The cannons roared to life with a thrum that shook the hull. Elias targeted a drifting KRLL parasite clinging to the wreckage, something the Vorith ship hadn't bothered with. One well-placed plasma shot burned it to cinders. The Vorith's prow tilted again, ever so slightly. Watching. Elias held his ground. Hold fire, he ordered softly. Let it see us. For long seconds the predator loomed. It could have destroyed them with a thought. It didn't. Instead it moved closer. A tendril of metal and muscle extended from its hull, grazing the edge of their shield bubble without striking. Not an attack. A test. Then came the sound, a deep, guttural resonance through the ship's hull. Not speech, not language. A pulse that bypassed comms and rattled straight through bone. Everyone on the bridge went still. The Vorith were not supposed to communicate with outsiders. The pulse repeated once, lower, slower. Elias exhaled. It's not a warning. Vega swallowed. Then what is it? Recognition, Elias murmured. We didn't run. The tendril withdrew. The Vorith vessel drifted back, folding into the dark like a creature melting into the sea. One last pulse shuddered through the hull, then the black swallowed it whole. Silence returned. Rafe was the first to speak. What the hell just happened? Elias didn't answer right away. He stared into the empty void where the predator had been, the echo of that low resonance still buzzing beneath his skin. Something had shifted. Not in the galaxy. In the way the galaxy saw them. Get us home, he finally said. As the horizon's edge turned back toward known space, Vega risked a glance at him. Sir, you think that thing spared us? Elias allowed himself the smallest of smiles. No. I think it noticed us. The stars stretched out once more, but the silence no longer felt indifferent. Something was awake out there now. Something with fangs. And for the first time in a long time, humanity hadn't been dismissed. It had been measured. The horizon's edge cut through the dark like a silent blade, its engines burning a thin trail of blue against the endless black. Elias Ward leaned against the railing of the command deck, replaying the last encounter in his mind. The Vorith hadn't attacked. It hadn't fled. It had looked at them, measured them, and decided something he couldn't yet name. That thought sat in his chest like a weight that wouldn't shift. He wasn't the only one who felt it. The bridge carried a hush that wasn't born of fear, but of something colder, anticipation. Council Relay just picked up our unsanctioned jump, Vega said, her eyes narrowing at the comm screen. They're demanding an explanation. Let them wait, Elias replied without looking at her. Rafe turned in his chair, brow furrowed. Sir, ignoring the council isn't exactly the safest move. It's also not our problem right now, Elias said. His voice was calm but deliberate, cutting through the tension like a scalpel. What happened out there is bigger than their rules. Rafe leaned back, crossing his arms. So what exactly did happen? Elias didn't answer immediately. His mind was still on the way the Vorith ship had extended that tendril toward them. A predator didn't offer mercy. It offered a test. And humanity had, for once, not flinched. Before he could speak, the comm officer's voice cracked the silence. Incoming transmission. Not council, encrypted. Unknown origin. The air in the room tightened. Vega gave Elias a questioning glance. He nodded. Patch it through. The bridge lights dimmed slightly as the main display shifted from star maps to a grainy, pulsing signal. At first it was only static, a low bass hum that rattled through the hall. Then the hum split into layered tones, shaped into something deliberate. A translation matrix engaged automatically, struggling to keep up with a language it wasn't designed for. The noise coalesced into a deep, resonant voice that seemed to crawl along the metal itself. You did not run. Vega went rigid. Rafe mouthed the word Vorith under his breath. The voice continued, slow and unhurried, each word pronounced like an ancient judgment. Others scream. Others beg. You answered. Elias stepped closer to the display, though there was no face, only darkness. Who am I speaking to? A low growl rippled through the bridge. Karzal. Vorith Warcast. The room seemed to tilt around the name. The Vorith didn't speak to outsiders. They didn't broadcast. They certainly didn't initiate conversation. Karzal wasn't a rumor anymore. It was real. Elias squared his shoulders. You destroyed the Iraq's convoy. They were prey, Karzal said simply. Loud prey. Weak prey. You are not. Rafe muttered something under his breath that sounded like a prayer. Elias ignored him. What do you want? There was a pause, a silence so thick it pressed against their ribs. Then, the swarm moves. Council hides behind walls of words. You hunt. The swarm, Vega whispered, and Elias felt the air shift again. Everyone in the fleet knew the name. KRYL. A hive species that devoured entire systems, burning civilizations down to bone and silence. The council spoke of them in cold strategy meetings but rarely acted. They'd already underestimated humanity. They'd underestimate this too. Elias felt something coiling beneath the surface, an old instinct he thought he'd buried with his uniform years ago. He understood now why the Vorith hadn't struck. They weren't hunting him. They were recruiting. You're asking us to fight, he said. Not asking, Karzal rumbled. You will fight. Or you will burn with them. The comm fell silent. No goodbye. No threat. The transmission cut out as suddenly as it came. Vega exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Rafe broke the silence. He's not wrong. If the KRYL swarm reaches council territory, Earth's next. Elias turned back to the viewport, where the stars shimmered like distant teeth. He had no illusions about what he was walking into. Humanity was a footnote to the council, a fragile species with small ships and smaller armies. But the KRYL didn't care about classifications. They devoured everything. And the Vorith, those apex predators, had decided humanity was worth standing beside, or at least worth not crushing underfoot. Open a secure line, Elias said. I want every captain in the frontier fleet on this channel. Vega hesitated. Sir, the council. Will do nothing, Elias snapped, sharper than he intended. Then softer, they've already made their choice. We need to make ours. Within minutes, the faces of fleet captains flickered onto the main display. Men and women who had spent their careers obeying orders from voices that never came down from the high towers of the council. Some were loyal. Some were bitter. All of them looked tired. Elias met their stares with the same steady fire he had carried since the hearing. "You've all seen the council's verdict," he began. "They've called us too weak to matter. Today, a Vorith ship found us on the rim. It could have erased us in seconds. It didn't. It spoke. And it warned of the KRWL swarm." Murmurs erupted across the comm net. Vega raised the volume slightly. One of the captains, an older man with a weathered face, leaned forward. "You're telling us you talked to a Vorith?" Elias nodded. "I'm telling you they see what the council doesn't. The KRWL aren't waiting for diplomacy. They're coming. And if we stand alone, Earth falls." "And what?" another captain snapped. "You want us to follow predators into a war the council won't fight?" Elias didn't blink. "I want us to stop asking permission to survive." The silence that followed wasn't resistance. It was calculation. These were people who'd spent their lives outnumbered, underfunded, dismissed. They knew what was coming. They just needed someone to say it first. Elias stepped closer to the camera. "They call us weak. That's fine. Weak things get overlooked. Weak things get underestimated. And that gives us a chance to do what no one else will." One by one the captains began nodding. Vega ended the transmission. The bridge was quiet again, but the air felt different now. Sharper. Focused. Elias could see it in their faces. Something was taking shape. Humanity had never been chosen for greatness. But it could seize it anyway. A proximity alert flared on the console, soft but insistent. Vega glanced at the screen. "Sir. Something's approaching." Elias moved to her side. A small, jagged shape was detaching itself from the darkness. Not a council ship. Vorith. Smaller than the war beast from before, but unmistakable. It was coming toward them at controlled speed, like a shark sliding through deep water. Rafe swore under his breath. "They're back." Elias stared at the display, the steady heartbeat of the incoming ship glowing in pale amber. He didn't order the guns armed this time. He didn't give the order to flee. He simply waited. The Vorith vessel stopped just beyond weapons range. A transmission flashed through instantly. No words this time. Just an image. A star chart. One sector highlighted in blood red. The KRWL were moving. The bridge fell silent again, but it wasn't fear now. It was inevitability. Elias straightened. "Tell the fleet. We're going." Vega turned toward him slowly, as if committing this moment to memory. "Captain, we're going to war." He didn't deny it. "No," he said quietly. "We're going to prove them wrong." The Vorith ship pulsed once, like a nod in the dark, before vanishing back into the void. The stars didn't change. The galaxy didn't care. But for the first time humanity had a purpose sharp enough to cut through the silence. The KRWL swarm appeared first as a distortion against the starfield, an uneven shimmer like heat rising off broken asphalt. Then the distortion split apart, and hundreds of high vessels bled into real space, each one moving with the precision of a single terrible mind. They didn't form fleets the way the Council did. They didn't negotiate. They consumed. The rim sector Elias had chosen as the ambush site was already beginning to darken under their advance. The horizon's edge held position at the edge of the debris field, lights blacked out, hull cooled to a whisper against the void. The rest of the human fleet drifted with it, 37 ships armed with more wool than firepower. Beneath them, Vorith vessels waited like predators in tall grass, hulls pulsing with that low guttural resonance that Elias could feel more than hear. The alliance was real now, carved not by diplomacy but by necessity. Rafe leaned over the tactical display, voice clipped. "Swarm count at 233 vessels. Estimated 30 hive spines, heavy carriers. Their formation is tight." Vega adjusted the sensor output, eyes narrowing as a massive silhouette cut across the center of the swarm. "That's the Queen ship. If they breach the station perimeter, the Council core will be next." Elias didn't look away from the viewport. He could already see it, the organic gleam of chitin armor, the faint red of bioplasma ports glowing like embers. The KRWL swarm was a storm made of flesh and calculation. Every battle they fought was the same: flood, crush, consume. But they had never fought humanity like this. He stepped forward. "Signal Karzul." The comm cracked with a deep rolling growl. Karzul's voice filled the bridge like the low grind of tectonic plates. "They come." "Good. They don't expect resistance. Elias said. Let's make sure they remember it. The Vorith leader's reply was simple. We hunt. The fleet moved as one. Human ships split into staggered formations, engines firing in synchronized bursts. Vorith warbeasts descended from the dark, their hulls bristling with bioplasma vents. Together they formed an uneven, predatory crescent around the KRLL vanguard. The swarm didn't slow down. It never did. First wave entering kill box in 30 seconds, Rafe said. His hands hovered above the controls, every muscle in his arm drawn tight. The ship's hull vibrated softly beneath their boots. Elias nodded. Fire when ready. The void exploded. Human plasma batteries screamed to life, carving blue lances through the first swarm clusters. Vorith ships lunged forward in synchronized, terrifying bursts, slamming through the KRLL front lines with spear-like precision. The ambush shattered the formation, tearing holes in their wave. The KRLL ships didn't scream. They simply corrected course, surging toward the attackers with the cold certainty of a tide that never turned back. Impact in 30 seconds, Vega warned. Her knuckles were white against the railing. Hold, Elias said softly. Vorith claws split hulls like fabric. Human frigates danced through the gaps, using gravity slings to turn faster than any council vessel dared. They didn't have the biggest guns, but they hit where it mattered: joints, vents, weak points. The swarm had expected cattle. It had found wolves. Rafe slammed his hand on the console. They're adapting. The swarm tightened, forming a spiral pattern that began collapsing the ambush ring. A thick wall of hive spines moved toward the center like closing jaws. Elias didn't hesitate. Execute pattern Delta 3. Human destroyers pulled back, dragging a chain of decoy mines behind them. Vorith warships slammed into the tightening swarm from the flanks, shattering their rotation. Explosions rolled across the field like thunder. Chitin cracked. Black plasma vented into the void. The horizon's edge dove through the chaos, thrusters straining. KRLL drones slammed against its shields in waves. The ship's frame shuddered, alarms flaring. Vega's voice was hard and focused. Shields at 67%. Hull plating holding. Good enough, Elias said. Bring us closer to the Queen. Rafe turned incredulous. Sir, that's suicide. It's the point, Elias replied. He didn't need to explain. They'd planned this from the beginning. If the Queen ship fell, the swarm would falter. Not die, but falter long enough for the others to finish the job. As they cut deeper into the heart of the battle, the Queen ship loomed into view, a fortress of bone and sinew, pulsing with red veins that throbbed like a living heart. It was larger than anything the human fleet could match. But beside it, Vorith ships were already tearing at its outer plating like predators ripping open prey. Karzul's warbeast roared through the comms, its hull braced against a storm of acid fire. Elias, Karzul growled. We break its spine. Then let's make it bleed. The horizon's edge weaved through a hail of bioplasma fire. 2 escort corvettes disintegrated to their starboard in silent blossoms of light. Vega shouted coordinates, Rafe adjusted the firing arcs, and the deck pitched as Elias forced the ship into a spin that would have snapped lesser crews in half. They broke through the outer defense ring, close enough now that the Queen ship's breathing was visible in the flexing of its outer shell. Targeting core node, Rafe said. On my mark. Above them, a Vorith warship slammed bodily into the Queen's flank, embedding itself like a spear. It didn't fire. It detonated, ripping a wound wide open. The Queen's scream was not sound but pressure, a wave of psychic noise that made every human on the bridge clutch their heads. Blood trickled from Vega's nose. Elias forced himself upright. Mark. The horizon's edge unleashed everything. Plasma cannons burned white-hot. Torpedoes streaked forward like falling stars. The shots slammed into the exposed wound, tearing deeper until the Queen's innards pulsed in naked red light. The beast shuddered, but the swarm didn't stop. More drones poured from the surrounding ships like locusts. The shields flared. The hull screamed. Shields at 23%, Vega rasped. Keep going. Karzul's voice cut through the chaos. One more strike. A shadow fell across their viewport as Karzul's personal warbeast descended above them. The Vorith unleashed a concentrated blast from its biocannons directly into the wound they'd opened. Light erupted like a miniature sun. The Queen convulsed. The swarm formation broke. Across the battlefield, KRLL ships faltered mid-maneuver. Their tight, unbreakable formations splintered like glass. Human and Vorith vessels surged forward to finish what they'd started. Drones fell in waves. Hulls cracked. Fires bloomed in the void. She's falling, Vega whispered. The queen ship began to tilt, massive tendrils curling inward, folding like a dying insect. When it finally ruptured, it was like watching a star implode, not with elegance but with violence. Rafe exhaled the breath he'd been holding. We did it. Elias didn't answer. His hands were locked on the railing, knuckles bloodless. Around them the battle wasn't over, stragglers still fought, smaller hives trying to reform. But the storm had broken. The impossible had happened. Humanity hadn't just survived. It had struck a monster down. Signal the fleet, Elias said, voice low. Push the line. No survivors. Vorath and human ships swarmed through the last Karwelo remnants like wolves through broken prey. Minutes blurred into fire and wreckage. When the final hive spine cracked apart under combined fire, silence finally descended over the sector. The Karwelo swarm was dead. On the bridge, Vega leaned back against her chair, exhausted. They'll hear about this. They have to, Rafe muttered. Elias stared out at the drifting carcass of the queen ship, its glowing heart now dark. Somewhere out there the council would hear. They would know who had stood between them and extinction. Not their fleets, not their proud empires, but the species they'd called too weak to matter. He turned away from the viewport. Set course for council space. The stars waited in silence, the path back already written in fire. The war wasn't finished. It was only beginning. The council chamber of Lythar Prime was built to intimidate. A single vaulted hall stretched for hundreds of meters, its ceiling made of transparent crystal that framed the restless swirl of the gas giant below. Rows of delegates sat in tiered platforms that curved in a perfect circle, their robes shimmering with every subtle movement. In the center, beneath the piercing light of the skylight, stood Elias. Every step he took echoed across the chamber. Not because of the room's acoustics, but because no human had ever walked that floor as a victor. The whispers came first, hissing, clipped, thick with disbelief. The council members didn't need translators for that emotion. Representative Elias Ward of Earth, the council speaker announced, voice smooth and precise. You stand before the Galactic Council to give an account of your actions during the unauthorized engagement at Rim Sector Theta 7. Unauthorized. Elias almost laughed. The word hung in the air like a blade. Behind him, Rafe stood at rigid attention, shoulders squared, jaw clenched. To his right, Vega remained calm, but her eyes tracked every movement in the chamber with surgical precision. They weren't soldiers here, they were symbols now. Humanity's fractured, underestimated image condensed into three figures. Karzul's arrival shattered the silence like a hammer to glass. The Vorath warlord stepped into the chamber with a weight that made delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. He wore no ceremonial garb, only the scarred armor still scorched from battle. His presence was not requested, but no one dared tell him to leave. Elias didn't turn. He didn't need to. Their plan had been forged in the fire of the Queen's dying breath. A counselor from the Vorntel Consortium rose first, the movement as graceful as it was venomous. You violated council protocol, she declared, voice ringing with sharp edges. You led an unapproved joint strike. You risked destabilizing half the sector. Elias lifted his chin. I stopped the Karwelo. You lucked into survival, another counselor snapped, a scaled creature with translucent frills. If that queen had breached the station ring, your fleet would have been vapor. But she didn't, Elias said, his voice steady, cutting through their rehearsed outrage. Because we fought. Because while you debated, we bled. The chamber stirred with agitation. Not all the faces around him were hostile. Some were calculating. Some were afraid. The speaker leaned forward. And yet, Representative Ward, humanity was not authorized to act as a military force in council operations. You are not recognized as a defense power. You are not warriors. That was the opening. Elias took a single step forward, not toward the speaker, but toward the entire room. You're right, he said. We're not warriors. Not in the way you define it. We don't build fleets that blot out suns. We don't terraform war worlds. We survive. And when the storm comes, we don't wait for someone else to save us. A murmur rolled across the chamber. The frilled counselor barked, survival is not strength. Elias locked eyes with him. Then how did we kill your nightmare? That silenced him. The chamber didn't breathe for a heartbeat. Vega shifted slightly, sensing the turn. Rafe's lips twitched into the smallest, sharpest grin he'd allowed in weeks. Karzul stepped forward, massive and uninvited. His voice carried like a thunderclap. I saw them fight. The speaker turned sharply. Warlord Karzul, you were not granted. They are not weak, Karzul interrupted, voice low and rumbling. The KRYL devoured our worlds. They learned our war songs and burned our dead on their chitin spears. We could not break the queen. They did. He turned his gaze to Elias. I stood with them. I would again. That single statement cracked something in the chamber. Vorith were feared, not admired. If a Vorith warlord swore loyalty, even temporarily, it carried weight sharper than law. The Vorntel counselor hissed, You speak for your kind? Karzul bared his teeth. I speak for warriors. Elias let the moment settle like a blade pressing against a throat. You call us weak. You built your hierarchies, your fleets, your councils on the idea that strength belongs to the loudest voice in the room. But strength isn't how loud you speak, it's how hard you hold when everything breaks. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. We stood between the swarm and this galaxy. And we did not break. The chamber shifted from agitation to something new, unease. The speaker exhaled slowly. Your actions, Representative Ward, have set precedent. You've shown that humanity is capable of coordinated military engagement at scale. The Council cannot ignore this. But neither can we reward recklessness. Elias felt Rafe tense behind him. Vega's fingers brushed her data pad, ready for any sign of a trap. Karzul rumbled, Then they will not ask. They will take their place. Elias met the speaker's eyes. You don't have to like us. But you'll remember what happened out there. You'll remember who saved you while you sat in this room. The silence that followed was razor sharp. The speaker leaned back. Very well. By vote of the Galactic Council, humanity is to be recognized as a military ally and defense power within Council jurisdiction. Access to fleet channels and war corridors will be granted, under observation. It wasn't a gift. It was control. But it was also a foothold. The first in history. Rafe exhaled slowly, tension bleeding out of his shoulders. Vega's jaw tightened, but her eyes burned with quiet triumph. Elias let the weight of the words settle. Humanity wasn't begging anymore. It was standing. But before he could step back, Karzul turned to the council, raising his voice to a growl that made even the speaker flinch. You will remember this day. Not because of your vote. Because the swarm fell to those you thought beneath you. And then, with a deliberate, resonant motion, he dropped to one knee, not in submission but acknowledgement. A Vorith warlord kneeling was rarer than a supernova. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Some delegates rose from their seats. Others whispered in frantic tones. Elias didn't smile. He didn't need to. History was already shifting under their feet. Later, as the delegation moved down the long marble corridor outside the chamber, Rafe finally let the adrenaline crack into words. You just made us a target. Elias glanced at him. We already were. Vega walked beside them, her tone measured. We'll be under their eyes now. They'll look for any sign of weakness. Then we won't give them one, Elias said softly. Ahead of them, the viewport opened to the cityscape of Lythar Prime, towering spires, drifting sky platforms, and a sky painted in storm-colored light. Karzul strode slightly ahead, a silent shadow of iron and bone. The Vorith weren't allies of convenience. They'd seen the hunt. They'd chosen the wolves. Elias paused at the threshold, feeling the weight of the galaxy finally shift, just a little. Humanity's name was no longer whispered as an afterthought. It had been carved into the record with blood and fire. He turned to his crew, to the warlord, to the stars. They called us weak, he said. Let them keep thinking it. Rafe's grin sharpened. Vega's gaze burned like a star. Karzul rumbled low approval. Because next time, Elias finished, stepping forward into the storm, they won't see us coming. And for the first time in galactic history, the council feared the sound of human footsteps leaving their chamber.